Good afternoon. Are we ready? Can I start speaking?
Yes, I'm recording.
Okay. I'm Andrew Natsios, the director of the Scowcroft Institute of International Affairs at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University. And I'm speaking to you from College Station, Texas. And we have an important guest speaker today to talk about the future of American-European relations. I will let the executive director of our satellite campus in DC, General J. Silvera, to introduce the ambassador. But I just want to say, begin with, we haven't got a stronger ally in Europe than the Polish government, the Polish people. And personally, I think the NATO alliance we need to reassert our support for the NATO alliance so we make it clear both to the members of NATO, but also to other countries, particularly to Russia, what the consequences will be if any of our member states are threatened. Anyway, we'll let the ambassador talk about that, but I just want to welcome all of you and tell you how pleased we are to have the ambassador with us. Jay, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks for your help and support of the Institute to help us host this event today. I'm Jay Silveria. I'm the executive director of the Bush School in Washington, D.C., and I am speaking to you from our location at 1620 L Street in downtown Washington, D.C. We have a remarkable opportunity today for the Bush School and for the students. Today we have Ambassador Piotr Wilczek. He's been the ambassador to the United States since 2016. Throughout his tenure in Washington, he's worked effectively to strengthen U.S. relations with a critical NATO ally, as Andrew points out. During this period, Poland and broader Europe and the U.S. have certainly faced traditional security threats as well as regional threats. But Poland, along with the United States, has also faced many transnational challenges, such as terrorism, cyber threats, and the ongoing pandemic, COVID-19, to name only a few. Throughout his time in Washington, the ambassador has been extensively involved in promoting and strengthening transatlantic relations, especially in defense, energy, and trade. The ambassador is certainly, though, no stranger to higher education. He taught at the University of Warsaw as a tenured professor and served as the director of the university's College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. He is, over the past 25 years, he's participated in several international research projects. He's been a visiting professor at a number of British and American universities and a panelist at many prestigious conferences. But sir, we can't imagine that anything more prestigious than the Bush School, right? Well, we're honored to have the ambassador here with us to speak about the evolving relationship between the US and Poland, as well as both countries' roles in Europe. We look forward to him speaking about the transition between President Trump and President Biden and how the relationship with Poland and broader Europe may evolve. For the format today, following the ambassador's remarks, he will be joined by Dr. Yuval Weber, a professor here at the Bush School in Washington, D.C., for a fireside chat format. And following, he will respond to questions from Yuval that many of the audience, have sent into our team. So please join me and welcome the ambassador, Piotr Wilczek. Mr. Ambassador.
Hello, everyone. I hope that you can hear me, that I'm unmuted properly. Thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to discuss Poland and transatlantic relations. I would like to thank the Scowcroft Institute for International Affairs at the Bush School of Government and Public Service, as well as the Bush School DC teaching site at the Texas A&M University for organizing this event. My special thanks go out to my good friend, Dr. Thomas Sinkin, for his initiative to invite me to speak at your distinguished university, and to Dr. Yuval Weber, who agreed to have a fireside chat with me to discuss how the US relationship with Poland and Europe has transformed over the last 4 years and how it will grow during the next 4. You are indeed very generous for allotting me a full 20 minutes for my remarks. However, I'm eager to delve into the discussion that we will soon have, so I will keep my remarks to a minimum, highlighting a few main points. As the ambassador of Poland to the United States, I feel especially privileged and honored to speak at 2 institutions named after great friends of Poland, President George Herbert Bush and his National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Brent Scowcroft. I need not explain to your audience their significance in international relations. I would like to emphasize, however, that President Bush and General Scowcroft were both deeply focused on Poland's transformation and, in fact, that of the entire European continent. A transformation in the 1980s, which swept into power solidarity in Poland, brought about the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, demolished the Berlin Wall, and gave new hope to the nations of the former Soviet bloc. General Scowcroft was an Atlanticist who believed in the value of alliances. President Bush caught the winds of change in his sails and never relented in maintaining the course of political and economic metamorphosis in Central and Eastern Europe. During a visit to Poland in 1989, President Bush said, "Poles and Americans share a commitment to overcome the division of Europe and to redeem the promise that is the birthright of men and women throughout the world. Poles and Americans want Europe to be whole and free." So if one is looking for common denominators between Poland and the USA, I think that the aforementioned would be a good example to start with. President Bush Sr. visited Poland in his official capacity twice, and each of his successors visited Poland as well. Presidents Bush Jr. and Obama both visited 3 times, and President Trump visited once, but hosted Polish President Andrzej Duda 3 times at the White House. Poland-US relations have been built and expanded upon thanks to a rock-solid foundation grounded in history, friendship, and trust ever since the Revolutionary War. Our bilateral relations have never been better, deeper, and multifaceted than they are today. Going forward, we will continue to work for the benefit of our 2 nations and the international community, just as we have done with every US administration so far, including our great cooperation with the Trump administration. Our long-standing tradition of cooperation is alive and well. Our goal today is to build upon the achievements made so far, including the US increased engagement in Central Europe, its strong commitment to strengthening NATO's eastern flank, US support for European energy security, and maintaining resolute policy towards Russia. We are proud of the strategic partnership that strengthens our bilateral cooperation in defense, security, scientific exchange, and innovation. Last year, as you may know, Poland signed the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which resulted in the increase of US troop numbers from 4,500 to 5,500, as well as the establishment of a command outpost of the 5th US Army Corps in the city of Poznań. There is also the 2019 Poland-US Joint Declaration on 5G, a very important issue today. the 2019 agreement on preventing and combating serious crime, as well as the strategic dialogue on energy. In 2019, Poland met the standards to be included in the visa waiver program. As you can see, our relationship is multidimensional. These are the markers that plot the direction of which our relations continue to expand. With many historic achievements in bilateral cooperation during the Trump presidency, especially in energy and defense, we hope to develop our historically strong Poland-US ties under the Biden presidency and make further progress on bilateral and multilateral issues. In many regards, we are in agreement with the Biden administration's agenda. The Polish government welcomes America's declaration to return to the Paris Climate Agreement, the WHO, the Human Rights Council, and other multinational structures. And by holding the presidency of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in 2022, the United States is also a member, Poland is already looking forward to America's support in its various multilateral initiatives. The long-standing focal point of our relations is our defense cooperation within NATO, the enhancement of our military capabilities, as well as building upon the strong US military presence in Poland. Geography and threat perception play an important role here. Generally, as you know, countries located closer to perceived threats are more serious in their defense spending, like Poland, for example. On the other hand, countries surrounded by other allies usually spend less. However, new challenges such as cyber and hybrid threats are no longer dependent on geography, as evidenced in many cases of election interference in Western Europe and the United States. This should be a wake-up call for many societies who believed that not bordering directly with hostile neighbors is enough of an excuse to disregard defense-related spending and investments. Energy cooperation will remain an important pillar of bilateral relations between Warsaw and Washington. Within the strategic dialogue on energy, we will focus or will discuss further cooperation in the gas sector, nuclear energy, renewable energy, new coal mining technologies, and cybersecurity. Of course, a part of energy cooperation is energy security through diversity. Hence, our mutual understanding of the risks that the Nord Stream 2 Russian-German pipeline poses for Europe. There are other European countries that are just as concerned with this issue of Nord Stream 2 as we are, yet somewhat, unfortunately, less vocal. Successive US administrations and Congress, to an overwhelming extent, have maintained a strong bipartisan approach against the development of this pipeline. And we hope that the Biden administration will continue this policy and help us to stop this project without compromising with those who are expecting its completion. We are strongly convinced that the United States can help to strengthen the energy independence of Central and Eastern Europe through the expansion of energy source diversification, the construction of energy infrastructure, and increasing security. If realized, Russia will not be able to use energy as a means of economic and political pressure, nor as a means to weaken democratic institutions and freedoms in Central and Eastern Europe, and in Europe as a whole. As a countermeasure, Poland is simultaneously working on the Baltic Pipe project, which will deliver gas from the Norwegian continental shelf, from Norway, to both Poland as well as end users in neighboring countries. Scheduled to be completed in 2022, the Baltic pipe will be another source of energy diversification for Poland and Central Eastern Europe. One such priority for cooperation is the Three Cis Initiative, a coalition of 12 Central and Eastern European countries which aims to develop infrastructure along the north-south corridor in Central and Eastern Europe. Thus, it is an excellent opportunity for the American private sector to invest in energy and telecommunications in Central and Eastern Europe, and at the same time, an alternative to the Chinese Belt and Road concept. We are delighted that both the new administration and Congress continue to support the Three Cis Initiative. In terms of trade, the United States is the largest partner for EU exports of goods and the second largest partner for imports of goods. In 2019, the European Union had a trade surplus of 153 billion euros with the United States. The scale and complexity of our economic partnership is a great achievement, which should be steadily deepened. Poland is committed to the principles of the international trade order. We strongly believe that competitive advantages should not be built upon tariffs, but rather upon innovation, flexibility, and market approach. The world has changed. It has become clear that a return to TTIP is not what both sides would like most at this point. Europe and the United States now need to engage in a peaceful dialogue, not only on the future of their economic relations, but also on an agreed approach to other challenges the free world is facing. Vaccine distribution, the rising significance of China, immigration, and stability of the greater Middle East, just to name a few. I believe Poland and the United States can, as the saying goes, walk and chew gum at the same time. We can develop our cooperation in such fields as defense, energy, the Three Cis Initiative, climate change, and promoting democracy, while at the same time ironing out differences of perception in other areas. There are no unimportant topics of conversation, and there is no substitute for an open and honest discussion, to which I am looking forward today. Thank you.
Okay. Dzień dobry, panie ambasadorze.
Dzień dobry.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for your comments. For those in the audience, my name is Yuval Weber, and I am faculty at the Bush School in DC. So, Mr. Ambassador, there were a number of sort of very interesting things that you said about, change and continuity in U.S.-Poland relations, and certainly there's a number of issues that I'd like to ask you about a U.S.-Polish and U.S. and NATO-Polish defense cooperation. But I'd like to start sort of towards the end of your remarks, in which you were describing, what is the key challenge to Poland and to Central European security, and that's of course being Russia. And so within the various issues between Poland and Russia, just as you were talking, I got an alert on my phone. The Biden administration is planning to release its sanctions, a new sanctions package against Russia for the SolarWinds hack in regard to Nord Stream 2, as well as for the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. So I'd like to ask you basically a historically based question. You described that the experience of Poland in terms of getting out of the communist era was through Solidarność, the Solidarity Party. So how do you see political change happening in your Eastern neighborhood? You have the example of Ukraine, which had a change of power, or change of regime. You also have Belarus, in which the likely winner of the last election, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, is now effectively in exile. And you have Alexei Navalny, who is going to be in prison for an indeterminate amount of time. So how do you see political change in your Eastern neighbors, and how do you see that, and how do you see Poland playing a positive role in that?
Thank you for this very, very interesting and challenging question. You mentioned Navalny, who is now like a symbol of these changes. No, the arrest of Navalny upon his return to Russia is troubling and cowardly. It shows a complete lack of interest by the Kremlin to at least pretend that it wants to cooperate with the West, and it raises doubts toward any attempts by the international community to find positive elements of engagement with Vladimir Putin. Energy or climate cooperation cannot appear as more important than human rights. So Navalny's jailing is, I would say, a logical consequence of the authorities' earlier actions against him. The court carried out political order from the Kremlin aimed at removing Navalny from public life for the next few years. That's what they, I think, want to achieve. In doing so, the Russian government, I think, hopes to avert a serious political crisis during Putin's presidency, marked, among other things, by the mass protests inspired by activists in recent weeks. So the repression against Navalny represents a demonstration of power, as does the wave of harassment against peaceful demonstrations. So it's not the only case, there is also the intimidation of Navalny's collaborators, the unjust jailing of Memorial's Mr. Dmitriev, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others. So the latest legislative and administrative crackdown on civil society in Russia is a testament to the need to make human and civil rights a top priority in the dialogue between the West and Russia. So, so we are very happy, actually, that yesterday's EU Foreign Policy Council meeting with the participation of Secretary Blinken resulted in the decision to place sanctions on Russia for Navalny's poisoning. And we hope that we can together draft a robust joint sanctions proposal, and Poland supports a strong sanctions response from the EU. And we believe that any high-level political contacts between the EU or United States and Russia should only take place once significant progress in these areas is made. It's too early for some official visits. We had in the last few weeks, and one of these visits was a great disaster, actually. So so we can observe now this growing disillusionment of the Russian public caused by the corruption and lawlessness of the authorities. And speaking of corruption, because as you know very well as an expert, the Navalny's case is very much about him being so outspoken about corruption in Russia, and the part of this corruption is the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. When you follow the history of Nord Stream, you can see how corrupted the whole project is, and we cannot comprehend the attitude of our German colleagues who act in contrast to many other member states of the European Union, to other member states' critical opinions of the project. As well, there's also a strong internal German opposition, and these attempts to push the construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Russia does nothing to justify this. Poisoning of Navalny, war in Ukraine, election meddling. Recently we faced the expulsion of EU diplomats exactly on the day when the EU top diplomat was in Moscow. So I of course mentioned previously his visit. So allowing Nord Stream 2 to be completed will create the impression that the United States is soft on Russia and caving into its demands. So it will also be seen as signaling that the US is effectively abandoning key US allies that oppose the pipeline, such as Poland, Ukraine, or the Baltic states. So we count on the continuation of the new administration's critical approach towards Nord Stream 2. We believe that it's, as was said on the record, that it's really critical, that there are no secret negotiations about Nord Stream 2 without participation of Poland, Ukraine, and other interested countries. So the US stance is of key importance as construction of Nord Stream 2 is close to completion, and we cannot lose months of successful efforts to block this anti-European project. So we hope that the bilateral support of our position, in the Congress will bring more robust position of the new administration.
So in that context, would you suggest that sanctions on individuals connected to, let's say, Navalny's poisoning would be insufficient, that there should be some issue linkage between Navalny or the SolarWinds hack or these other issues to Nord Stream 2 to try and reshape Russian behavior?
Well, I mean, the link or the connection between Navalny's case and Nord Stream 2 is very obvious, because it's all about Russian policy in Europe, and Nord Stream 2 is, of course, an attempt to make Europe economically dependent on Russia, and this is a great risk for these few countries in Europe which support Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 2 can be beneficial for their economies, but in the long run, very risky for European security. So, well, speaking of sanctions, there is always this dilemma, because if you impose wider sanctions, the question is to what extent they could be harmful for regular people and for the economy of the country. But these sanctions we've had so far also including sanctions announced against Nord Stream 2, because as you know very well, these sanctions announced last week by the State Department on Nord Stream 2 are basically, it's a different sanctions program, but it's basically against companies which were already sanctioned by the Trump administration. So there is nothing new, and we are just waiting for a more unambiguous position of the United States.
Okay. So it's, in thinking about what is the continuity of, let's say, the US sanctions regime against Russia, and, how the United States and European partners can work together on this, there were some elements of the Trump administration which were a bit friendlier to Russia, some which were also in opposition to Russia. So you had some volatility basically between the last administration and what we can see in terms of this administration. Clearly, one of the sort of issues, or sort of one of the things that define Poland's current image, is that it was very friendly towards President Trump. There was issues that we had a number of questions from the audience about for Trump, which I'll get to in just a second. But how do you assess the ability of, let's say, Poland to maintain continuity in its relations with the United States? How does it deal with change when, the current government in Poland was quite friendly towards President Trump, but also needs to be also quite friendly towards President Biden? So how do you maintain continuity when there's a lot of change between governments?
Well, we had a very good relationship with the Trump administration, as with all previous administrations after 1989. And as I mentioned in my remarks at the beginning, the United States was essential for Poland's independence and for for the solidarity movement in 1980s. So, I mean, the relationship has been very good. I mentioned all these visits of presidents. So I arrived in Washington as ambassador 2 days before the election of President Trump, and for all these 4 years from January 2017, I was trying to do my best to continue a very good relationship with President Trump. And there was, of course, this was the intention of that administration to have a good relationship with Central and Eastern Europe. So if we are afraid of something, it's not just about Poland, it's about Central and Eastern Europe, that because of the difficult relationship of the Trump administration with Germany, that for obvious reasons, the current administration will be more focused on repairing the relationship with Germany or France or Brussels, and as some people say, forgets about or abandon Central and Eastern Europe. So for that reason, we are very excited that the new administration, quite a few times, including 2 messages from Secretary Blinken, endorsed the Three Cis Initiative, because this was the initiative very much supported by the Trump administration. The first and actually only visit of President Trump in Poland in July 2017 was to meet all 12 leaders of these 12 Central and Eastern European countries. So a kind of inauguration of American involvement in the Three Cis Initiative and big endorsement was from President Trump. So because the Three Cis Initiative is very much about the involvement of American business in Central and Eastern Europe, of American investment in improving infrastructure on this north-south axis. So we believe, I'm mentioning that because our cooperation with the United States is very pragmatic and has been very pragmatic in energy. We, as you know, signed a few long-term contracts for American LNG, and they will obviously be continued. And this is our idea of energy diversity to the Baltic pipe I mentioned, and also the imports of American LNG. So I believe this will be continued. Also, the defense cooperation, American involvement in increasing the presence of US troops on the Polish soil, it was all started under the Obama administration. Under the Trump administration, it was just continued with a great success. And well, speaking of that, there is a kind of misunderstanding about American military presence in Germany, because some people were saying that Poland wants to bring American troops from Germany to Poland. It was never our policy, and it was emphasized by my president in June last year at the White House that we want stronger American presence in Europe, including Poland. So Poland never said anything against, or in favor of leaving American troops leaving Germany. So so you also mentioned Fort Trump. Do you really want me to say something about Fort Trump?
In terms of the numbers of questions that we received, the most common single question was, is there going to be a Fort Trump into the future? And obviously the question, the underlying intent of that question is, when Poland conceives of its own defense, how does it think about basically cooperation within NATO, which you just referred to, in terms of increasing just the presence of the United States within NATO structures in Germany, Poland, and perhaps other places, versus how much does Poland want or think about a bilateral security relationship where there is something between the United States and Poland directly in terms of bolstering Polish defense?
So first of all, the name Fort Trump was just a rhetorical musing aimed at succinctly describing what Poland aimed to achieve within the realm of national security. A permanent US military presence in Poland. You know, that was our goal. And the name Fort Trump did not appear in any official documents or agreements. But I think that, you know, some politicians, you know, called it like that. It was like, it made headlines because it sounded nice, but we never discussed actually Fort Trump. First of all, you know, we signed, as you know, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with the United States in August last year. Warsaw's push to expand the American military presence in Poland stems from the necessity to ensure both Poland's security as well as the security of NATO's eastern flank. So this is all interconnected. You know, it's we don't have much time to discuss details, but of course we have bilateral agreements with the United States. But the whole idea is to have it as a coherent part of NATO presence in Poland. And going back for a minute to Fort Trump, the agreements and declarations that were signed between our two countries do not specify a single location where American troops will be stationed, but rather presume distribution of various military units throughout multiple locations in Poland. So, I mean, what Fort Trump or Fort America is just this number of, like, you know, and, you know, Polish-American relations have a significant impact on the security system of NATO's eastern flank, as we call it. So, for example, the Armored Brigade Combat Team deployed to Poland and its supporting elements, including the Combat Aviation Brigade and the anti-missile defense system in northern Poland, are just a few examples of the durability of our transatlantic bonds. And you know, the decisions made during the NATO summit in Warsaw in 2016, still under the Obama administration, are, I would say, reinforced by bilateral efforts, which are, I think, key to strengthening NATO's defense and deterrence potential. So we have this very important American initiative called European Deterrence Initiative, under which the ABCT was deployed to Poland and other countries of NATO's eastern flank. So, well, to make a long story short, it's very interconnected, and there is no contradiction between US-Polish military cooperation and NATO. We are both NATO members, and what we do together is also part of NATO deterrence on the eastern flank.
That's so great. And so, you know, the audience members should understand that, you know, as part of the ambassador's remarks, there is obviously a lot in which Poland and the United States cooperate bilaterally, as well as working together within NATO structures. Clearly, much of this, which is driven by issues such as the transition that is happening in Ukraine, the potential transition or instability that comes from Belarus, as well as the general challenge that is posed by Russia. So there's a number of other questions about the Three Cis Initiative, LNG. We have a number of questions about China's Belt and Road Initiative and how that enters into Europe. But before I turn to questions from the audience, I'd like to actually ask you a more personal question. You are, you know, before you were a professional diplomat, an extremely illustrious tenured professor who's one of Poland's leading experts on the Catholic Reformation in Poland. So in terms of your academic career, and I must say, you've also taught at the University of Texas at Austin, which is A&M's great rival, and secretly it is my alma mater. And you also taught at other places such as University of Chicago and Cleveland State, as well as other places in Europe. But in terms of your, I don't know if it's your previous life or maybe future life as well, in which you studied subjects in depth, created research questions, and really deliberated on issues as an intellectual historian and as a literary translator. How do you square that training of thinking about one thing very carefully versus the fire hose of information, the news cycle, where you have to deal with a million things all at once. How do you deal? So basically, how does being a professor help you be a diplomat or not?
Well, this is, I think, a very good question. No one has ever asked me such a question. I should say first that, my 4 years in Washington, more than 4 years, is like, graduating college or getting another degree. And it's a very fascinating series of experiences and lectures. But speaking of my previous experience, I think that, first of all, I think that ambassadors should be well educated. And I know, and I can see that in Washington, all ambassadors from all countries are very well educated people, and sometimes have degrees in various disciplines like, philosophy or literature or English or biology, not necessarily in international relations or political science. So I think that, of course, when you do your research in whatever subject, it needs a lot of critical thinking, analysis of texts. It's so important for a diplomat to be able to analyze texts and to draw conclusions. And I think that when you have this liberal arts or humanities education and you had to deal a lot with texts, including actually some diplomatic letters or cables. There were no cables at that time. I studied, from the 16th century. You can basically, learn how the world works. And first of all, I think it's all about critical thinking. That your education, your liberal arts education, it teaches you how to think critically and not take things for granted, and how to analyze. I also published a textbook on rhetoric. I actually practice public speaking as a professor. So this is also very helpful for a diplomat to do public speaking and to analyze speeches and so that's and well, during my academic career, I also had a lot of administrative experience. I was a dean of a big school, so it was also very helpful because when you are an ambassador, you are also a kind of a CEO of a small organization, or maybe middle-sized, but still it's a big number of people who need your leadership. So I should say that my previous experience has been very helpful. And I hope to go back to teach at a university when I finish my posting here, and I think it will be a very, very different experience after these 5 years in Washington.
Okay, no, it's and so for the students as well as just people in the audience, take note of that. The ability to read critically and understand text not only helps you in lots of different jobs later on in life, but we could sort of also speak in terms of thinking about media literacy and how to be your own defense against misinformation is if you can read and think critically. So it's always a good thing to remember. So with some of the time that we have left, I wanted to turn to some of the questions that we had from the audience. And so this is a question which I'll group because we got some similar ones. This is from Jim Mazurkiewicz, Christopher Gaida, and Witold Łukaszewski from Brian Sherman in the Woodlands, Texas. The question is to explain, what is the Three Cis Initiative between the Baltic, Black, and Adriatic Seas? So what is the current status of the Three Cis Initiative in light of impending climate change control policies likely to be pursued by the Biden administration? You'd mentioned earlier that Poland will continue to fulfill its commitment to buy liquefied natural gas from Texas, but can you explain the Three Cis Initiative and how it works in the energy cooperation between the United States and Poland?
Thank you for this question. I should say that, first of all, the Three Cis Initiative is not only about buying American gas. It's much more. Some people in the United States thought that it is just about buying American LNG and importing it by Eastern Europe. But it is about energy diversity, of course. And first of all, it's about cooperation of these 12 countries. Most of them, it's not their fault, are kind of underdeveloped when compared to Western Europe, because most of them, I mean, all of them except for Austria, all other countries, members of the initiative, the Baltic states, Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovenia, etc. They were, under communism. So the key issue is here to, of course, to develop the infrastructure and interconnectors and pipelines, and also work together on these big challenges brought to us by climate change, but at the same time take into account the real situation in these countries. Many of them, including Poland, are the energy is still based on coal mining industry. So it is so when we think about, for example, cooperation with United States, it's for example about new clean technologies as far as coal is concerned. It's also about civil nuclear energy. Just recently, both countries, I mean, the US and Poland, ratified the agreement on cooperation in civil nuclear energy. Of course, we are also looking for cooperation with other countries, but the United States is right now our major partner. So yes, so this energy aspect is important, and I would say that first of all, a very key element of the Three Cis Initiative is the Three Cis Initiative Investment Fund. The idea is that that investment banks from all these countries, but also from the United States, we have this pledge of American contribution of up to 1 billion. So now it's about a few hundred millions from DFC, so that these countries will jointly invest in this independent investment fund. But first of all, we hope that the investment fund will attract investors from other countries like Japan and South Korea and many others. So this is just an instrument for these 12 countries to attract investors to joint projects, because some of these countries are bigger, like Poland or Romania. Some of them are smaller, but we have the same challenges, and we have to build new railroads and to build all kinds of transportation routes, and also face these challenges. You mentioned China. I mean, the Three Cis Initiative is not just an anti-Chinese initiative. It has nothing to do, it's not an opposition to the Belt and Road Initiative. A Belt and Road Initiative is a part of the dialogue of a larger group of countries with China. And we are all realistic, and we know that all our countries have very extensive economic cooperation with China, including Poland and the United States. It's the challenge here is how it's all arranged, organized, and if it's really fair. And we should be very cautious, in this respect. But I just wanted to emphasize that we have normal and quite extensive trade relations with China, as Germany has, and France and the United States. It's our challenge with China is that we should be very cautious about how it's all organized, and and we should be sure that China will become a reliable partner, but we cannot just stop trade with China. So again, the Three Cis Initiative is not anti or pro anything. It's an coalition. It's an informal coalition. That's also important. It's not another organization, because all members of this coalition are members of the European Union. So there are some discussions about including both Ukraine and the Western Balkans into the initiative. But until today, we very much rely in our projects also on the European Union funds. So all these countries are members of the European Union, and they can be included in these projects. So again, this is a pragmatic, practical coalition supported until today by the United States because it's a great opportunity for investors. But this is not an international organization, or this is not an anti-Belt and Road or anti-China or pro-American or anti-someone. It's just a pragmatic business coalition, I would say.
But it certainly sounds like an opportunity for Poland to generate some amount of regional leadership, within Central and Eastern Europe, perhaps akin to some degree to the intermarium concept from, between the wars. And you'd mentioned in that President Trump had come to visit. It was in connection to the Three Cis Initiative meeting. Will President Biden, or should I ask you, will President Duda of Poland, does he have any plans to meet, obviously virtually, with President Biden anytime soon? If so, do you have any sort of knowledge that you can shed on the matter?
Well, we've had already, as many countries, not too many, we've had all these working conversations with the administration. Our national security advisor had a telephone or video meeting with Jake Sullivan. Today there was a plan. I hope it was not postponed, of a conversation of my foreign minister and Secretary Blinken. So it's like going on step by step. We understand that the Biden administration is now very much engaged in improving a relationship with the European Union, and so the priority for the president was to meet the European Union leaders and leaders of a few countries in Munich, also virtually. So this is not the moment to plan any engagement of the two presidents, but we are in touch, and I should say it works very well. We have working relationship with NSC and the State Department, and our leaders have. So I hope that the high level meetings will happen, but we understand that it's now more about blocks of countries in Asia, in Europe, and so that's the situation right now.
Okay. And so the final question that we received from the audience here, and this is sort of a continuation of a previous note, is, one of the things that perhaps President Trump did was really sort of redefine the relationship of the United States towards China and Russia as one of great power competition, so more confrontational than it was in the past. So as you mentioned, the Belt and Road Initiative is making its way across Central Asia. It'll make its way across the Caucasus. It's coming to Europe at a certain point. So how do you see Poland's view on, welcoming the huge economic opportunity that the Belt and Road Initiative promises, in addition to maintaining, let's say, the political security and institutional primacy of, the international liberal order?
Well, again, I think I've said most of what I can say about this issue, and of course, security is essential. For that reason, we signed this agreement with the United States on cooperation on 5G. So there are some, some limits, and there are some security issues that, of course, are essential for us. So when I mentioned a big trade with China of most countries in the world, I didn't mean that there are no concerns about security which should be taken into account. So I mean, 5G is one of these issues, and we cooperate very closely with the United States. And well, I mean, I think it's not my role to discuss the great power competition. I should say that we were following very closely the Trump administration's policy on Russia and China, and we were basically very much in favor of a very strong position on China and Russia, and we see a kind of continuation in this respect. There are some differences, like with the New START treaty, which was extended by the Biden administration. There were no plans in the Trump administration to extend New START. So there are like different approaches to policy or to relations with Russia. Let's extend it and talk about improving it instead of let's not extending it. We have, of course, our own concerns about non-strategic nuclear weapons not included in this treaty. So we believe that it will be, of course, improved. So this is obviously a different approach. But I can mention one example. We haven't discussed the Middle East, but as you may remember, Poland was very much involved in this quite innovative approach to the Middle East peace process of the previous administration. The result were the Abraham Accords. I believe, as I read recently, kind of endorsed by the Biden administration. This was a very unconventional approach to the Middle East peace process, and the beginning was the Warsaw Conference in February 2019, when Israel and some Arab countries met at the same table for the first time in Warsaw in 2019, and this was the beginning of what we called the Warsaw Process, which had its own agenda, some working groups on various issues like security and energy, and human rights in the Middle East. At the same time, there was this continuation, which resulted in the so-called, Abraham Accords. So this was one of these very, very important achievements of the previous administration's foreign policy, including Israel and Arab countries. And I believe that in this way or another, it will be continued by the Biden administration.
Okay, so we have just time for one more very quick question before we come to the top of the hour. So as you obviously know, there are more than 9.5 million people of Polish heritage in the United States, including myself. My grandmother was born in Warsaw. So as the ambassador to the United States from Poland, how do you connect people who may be second, third, fourth generation, who may not, let's say, speak Polish anymore, but have an interest in the culture? How do you connect to those people in the US to the contemporary Poland?
Well, before COVID, I traveled a lot. I visited many states, and in all states, especially those which have a big Polish community, like New Jersey, like Connecticut, like Texas and North Carolina, and many others, I met, hundreds of people. Pennsylvania, of course, my family and some of my ancestors live in Pennsylvania, so it's a big Polish community there. In Chicago, of course, in Illinois, there is a big Polish community. So I visited all these communities and took part in parades like Pulaski Parade in New York. And well, now it's much more difficult. I am in touch with Polish community leaders via Zoom sessions or telephone. It's not the same, but this is a big community which has a great potential and which was very helpful when Poland was joining NATO in 1999. There was not an overwhelming support, in the United States in mid-90s for Poland joining NATO, and the Polish-American Congress was very active, and the Polish community was very active. Polish Americans have many foundations, like the Kościuszko Foundation. I was representing this foundation in Warsaw for 2 years before coming here. So this is actually a very vibrant community, very helpful, and I'm in touch with them on everyday basis with their leaders. I really miss these big gatherings of Polish Americans in which I took part, and great Polish food, which I could enjoy during these parades and big big meetings and big Catholic Polish masses. Now it's over. I hope not forever, and that I'll still have a chance to meet Polish community, especially in California and Arizona, because I was in California only once as an ambassador and with my president, but I didn't have a visit myself. So and even in Alaska, there is quite a big Polish community. We have great 20 honorary consuls, which are most of them Polish Americans. So yes, this is an important community, and I feel their support.
So great. So on behalf of the Scowcroft Center at Texas A&M and on behalf of the leadership of Bush School in Washington, D.C., dziękuję. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, have a great day, and thank you to the audience, and we hope to see you for further Bush DC and Scowcroft Center events in the future. Thank you very much, and take care.
Thank you.